Broadcasting from Manhattan Beach and the World Wide Web, you're listening to CHSR, HealthyLife.net.
As a service to our listeners, this program is for general information and entertainment purposes only. CHSR, HealthyLife.net does not recommend, endorse, or object to the views, products, or topics expressed or discussed by show hosts or their guests. We suggest you always consult with your own personal, medical, financial, or legal advisor.
Happy Wednesday, everyone. You're listening to All About Healing. I'm your host, Emily Francis, and we have the fabulous producer, Jay, on the line with us. I am always so grateful for Jay, the producer, for the station, and for you, my beautiful listeners, for taking your time out of your day to come and commune with my guests. I try really hard to get the best of the best on the show, and I want to thank you. And also remember that I have moved recently out of the United States into the country and island of Malta, and sometimes reception gets a little bit hairy, and we are on live. So if anything should happen, I promise I'll call back in, but bear with me and be patient, and I send you love and gratitude. Okay, without further ado, I'm really excited about today's guest because this book is really groundbreaking of really old history. So it's really amazing information being brought into our life, into the now for people to listen to. The book is called Your Symphony of Selves. Discover and understand more of who we are. The authors are James Fadiman, Ph.D., and Jordan Gruber, J.D. J.D., I just asked, this means that he's a lawyer. Jordan Gruber is the author that is joining us today for this show. So, Jordan, I'm so glad to have you. Welcome to All About Healing.
Oh, I'm excited to be here, Emily. Thank you.
The thing is, I usually am pretty calm going into these shows, but I'm so pumped about your book that I'm having a hard time sort of compartmentalizing my energy to keep myself calm enough to get this information because there's a lot here. So I want to start really basic with the title, Your Symphony of Selves. What made you come up with that title?
Well, we were looking for a title for the book, and I went into my big easy chair upstairs, and I kind of channeled those as the right words to represent that we're talking about individuals having different parts of themselves or different selves or sub-personalities, and when they all play together, like in an orchestra, when the right ones are playing the right notes in the right times in your life, then your life works a lot better. And so we just thought that title really kind of captured it.
It's really stunning, and I understood more of it as I started to read some of the book. And I have to tell you, I have personally gone through soul retrieval and extraction from a shaman.
Okay.
And your book it really touches on so many things that I've questioned in my own spiritual search in my own different places, studying Hinduism and Buddhism and religious philosophy and Christianity and shamanic and native medicine. There's so much there. So what I want to start with is the basic overview of what people that are listening, what you're going to try to explain to us today.
Sure. Well, it's really a very simple thing, and it all started when Jim Fadiman, quite a while ago, became clear to him that everyone that he saw had a variety of different selves or parts or personalities that kind of came in and out depending on what they were doing. And Jim was astonished that this seemed obvious, yet no one spoke about it, hardly ever. And the reason no one ever speaks about it is that there is an assumption that we have called the single self assumption, which says that you are or ought to be a single self. And that is reinforced by Western philosophy and what's called essentialism and by monotheism. And since 1910, the idea of selves hasn't been heard of. So all of us, our entire lives, are constantly being forced to try to come up with just the one self who we really are. And what we're saying is that that's not actually the way the world is built. It's an erroneous assumption. Everyone we've ever met, everyone in our lives, including the most successful people and the healthiest people has a variety of different selves. And for us, mental health is really being in the right mind or the right self at the right time. And so when you realize that instead of being shifted or triggered into parts of you that you might not want to be in given where you are and who you're interacting with, you can learn to shift yourself instead of being triggered or switched. Life gets a lot easier, a lot quicker.
Now, I have a question about this because you also touch on this in the afterlife of energy as well. Can you go into that?
Well, so the book is a very pragmatic book in the sense that we believe there's an erroneous assumption at the core of almost all psychology, and we're just pointing it out and offering a different and better ways to live. As part of doing that, we have presented a tour de force. We've looked at philosophy, religion, culture, language, cartoons, neuroscience, psychology, of course, postmodernism, Buddhism. We've looked at a whole lot of things because some people like to know kind of the details. But the details ultimately aren't that important. What's important to know is that there's 6, 7, 8, 10, 15, whatever main cells that you tend to move in and out of. When you realize that those cells are real, that they have innate value, that you can't just get rid of them, that they often have their own agendas, then you can begin to harmonize your whole system and work with them. So as part of the tour de force, we went ahead fairly late in the book, it's chapter 9, I think, and gave a list of what everyone else had said about where cells come from and when they show up and where they might originally arise from, and we put all of that together in a big chart, and part of that chart includes what we call internally psychospiritually generated cells. And that could be reincarnational cells or your high self or whatever it is, but most of that material is what we call beyond our pay grade. It's sort of like if that's how you're experiencing reality and you want to integrate that in, fine, but we don't want people to take their eye off the ball of getting that they really do have different parts of themselves, and that recognizing and learning to integrate that makes their life better. And when you know that the people in your life have different selves, then you can be a lot more forgiving and compassionate. So when someone forgets something that you told them 10 minutes ago, you might realize that they've shifted into a different part of who they are, and they really don't have that information. They're not just trying to mess you up. And so the bits about, alien cells, reincarnational cells, high selves, inner helpers, all that stuff, we look at all that, and, we talk about Carl Jung and his relationship to that material, but we don't stay too focused on that. We're always coming back to, when I, go pick up my daughter at daycare, I'm a radically different person than when I'm, at my office and my boss is there. And that's a very different person, really, than who I am when I'm hanging out with my old friends and partying.
True. Absolutely true. Now, I'm going to ask what I'm going to deem probably every interview asks you, and I apologize for my complete basicness of this, but I have to ask it and bring it in. Now, Dr. Fadiman has a degree from Harvard and Stanford. He's obviously he's studied this in research multiplicity for over 20 years, and I do want to get into the psychedelic study as well. But I want to talk about just very briefly where a diagnosis of schizophrenia comes into play, or does it at all, with the stuff that you guys are presenting.
Right. So the first thing is that we try to stay away from medical diagnostic labels because, generally speaking, we don't think they help that much.
Right.
But second of all, we get all the time people are asking us about multiple personality disorder and dissociative identity disorder, and they're asking us about bipolar, and they're asking us about schizophrenia, because there's some notion that people hear voices in all of that. So schizophrenia, and we quote my old friend Ken Wilber in the book, is more of a systems-wide breakdown where people do not do well in any of the selves that they're in. That's a very different thing than what has been thought of as, let's say, multiple personality disorder or dissociative identity disorder, where people just have different selves. So You know, again, this is not a book that's focused on pathology. We're very aware of pathology, and we go to school on pathology, but we're trying to go in at the core of psychology and look at things like dissociation, which we kind of take apart in the appendix and say, let's replace that with cohesion. Let's follow the way of transpersonal psychology and build from the ground up a positive system that takes into account that we really do have these different selves. So there is some mention of pathology, but I think the main point here is that a lot of people think that if you have more than one self that you're mentally ill, and in fact dissociation is defined from moving from one self to another. But if I'm in a situation where I'm going to start arguing with a friend and I realize I'm getting to the part that had a bad argument with that friend and I shift away from that and go into a kinder part of myself, that is not an act of mental pathology. That is an act of health. So someone might be very sick. They might have different selves that need help, and they might have a system-wide failure like schizophrenia, but that's kind of very different than where the focus of our book is, because, again, we're just not that oriented towards pathology.
Well, that makes total sense, and honestly, it's the right way to approach. I think I just was more wondering if somebody has been diagnosed with such mental illnesses, would they be able to decipher or recognize that it might be something much deeper and from a very wonderful depth of the spiritual foundation that could help navigate in a different context? Because I do want to take this segue into psychedelics, because I know that Dr. Fadiman has a lot of information about it. His last book was about microdosing and psychedelics. But can you take me there? Can you talk to me about psychedelics and how that affects our knowledge, our wisdom, and our understanding of the selves?
Well, it's interesting because people have been asking us about this for a while, because Jim, especially with regard to microdosing, is one of the most well-known authorities on the planet. When we wrote the book, we wanted to keep it separate from his psychedelics work. So there's a few mentions of psychedelics in the book. But what we're saying, now as people are talking to us, especially in the context of the pandemic, is that it becomes very useful with microdosing, because you get to see the different cells that you move in and out of a little more clearly some of the time. And you might remember a part of you that has a lot of fun doing something that you haven't thought of for a long time, and you'll revive that hobby, or you'll move into a new part of who you are now. So, I mean, psychedelics are tricky. And if we just keep it to microdosing, we can say that some people might be more aware of their selves when they're microdosing. Some people might have more facility in shifting in and out of different selves, or seeing their entire constellation of selves. But, we've just really started thinking about this, and we're going to write a blog on our webpage soon, because we think it's an important question. But there's no real definitive way of thinking about selves and psychedelics, other than that they both very much speak to creativity and to, hidden potential within the human being.
Okay, so let's go back a step for everybody that's listening, and myself included. Take me to the basics of what exactly is microdosing. What are you microdosing? What is it?
Well, okay, but I really don't want to spend too long on microdosing, because that's not what this book is about. When you're microdosing, you're taking 1/10 or less of the dosage that you would take on psilocybin or LSD. When people take these very small doses, if you take so much that you see sort of flashes or start really actually feeling hallucinogenic, you've taken too much. The idea is you could take an amount where you could keep having your regular work day. And so this very small amount isn't dangerous to people, and yet all sorts of amazing things are occurring from people who do this, like, for example, treatment-resistant depression seems to fall to microdosing. There have been some amazing things with women and their menstrual periods, and certain people with terrible headaches. So, it's not all that known. Jim had a chapter on microdosing in his last book, The Psychedelic Explorer's Guide, and he hasn't written a full book on microdosing, and it's not sure that he will or he won't, but he does have a couple of articles out there, and he does have a web page that you can find that has some of the results presented.
Okay. Because I know that this is not the actual focus, although I won't lie, it was actually a drive of mine because I have suffered from anxiety for so many years. And I've heard and I've come through it really well, but it's always there. It's kind of like being in recovery. You know, I can fall into those fearful thoughts. I'm not without function the way that I had actually allowed myself to go down for a few years. It's been a really long time, but I've heard things about this particular treatment protocol that not only has great results with depression, but also with anxiety. So that's where I was sort of coming in.
We would have to double-check this, but my understanding is that anxiety doesn't do as well as depression does, that it's not really quite as good for anxiety as it is for depression. But I can help you find that after the show if you want, or just ask Jim directly.
Well, and nicely, thankfully for me, I've got it really, it's shifted in a beautiful way. So now it's sort of just a passenger or a backseat driver sometimes, and it's I'm a different person. So that is some of the stuff.
Here's what I would invite you to reframe that as saying that you have a self that has a lot of anxiety, and that sometimes shows up in your life. There are times when it won't be appropriate for that self to be present, but there are times when it will be present because it has other skills and facilities. But as you become aware of that part of you as well as being its own, I mean, we define selves ultimately as self-states, and self-states are recurrent patterns of mind-body chemistry and neurology and perception and intention and behavior. So there's a part of you that kind of shows up on a regular basis that has anxiety, and you view it as being this autonomous self that has its own needs, feelings, agendas, and value. By being aware of that part of you, we feel that communication opens up automatically, and following Tim Galloway, awareness heals. Just being aware that that's a real part of you, it's just not some thing that bothers you that you can't fix. It's actually one of the core parts of who you are. And so by acknowledging it, recognizing it, working with it, you will begin to heal it and find the most appropriate places for it to show up and for it to do what it's good at doing.
That's so beautiful. And that reminds me of one of the things that you guys talk about is like Beyonce going into Sasha Fierce or David Bowie, that some of these people have really learned to integrate the different aspects of self or the different symphonies that they run by. Because to me,
Herschel Walker's book. We talked about Herschel Walker, the famous multi-sport athlete. And even though his book is about how he has a dissociative identity disorder, almost the whole book is talking about how he figured out these different parts of himself. And he says this great line, which is, you wouldn't want the part of me that was, the NFL, title championship running back to be the person who babysits your kids. Those are different parts of me. And then he talks about this part where he learns how to heal the pain in his knees when he's a teenager. And he's very explicit that he's cultivating these different parts or aspects or selves, and it's really quite a model for everybody to follow.
That is a beautiful way to look at it. Because when I hear the word symphony, according to your book, because I hear different sort of music when I meet people or different energies or if my hands are on people because I do body work. But when I feel and tap into the idea of symphonies, to me it's like the waves that I talk about, the different energetic waves that you can sort of slide on to live from. And you can sort of move up and down according to where your energy is. Is that a fair, comparison?
Well, we give a whole lot of metaphors and models for how you work with yourselves. And one of them is very much sort of the symphony or the jazz band is maybe even better, where, part of you is in the lead and it knows what it's doing and it's riffing and the other parts are sort of supporting. But then you come up to something where that part really can't be in the lead anymore and it steps back and someone else shows up with a new theme. So that's sort of how it works.
I love that. I know that we're getting very close to a commercial break, so I don't want to open up too much. But I think that this is really powerful, especially right now when everybody's kind of isolated, because I hope that people use this time to look deep inside and not be afraid of what they see. Or if they are afraid of what they see, do some work within to help integrate more seamlessly.
Well, and the parts of you that are, that you haven't used for a long time, that are good at having fun, you can invite them to show up a little more, maybe an artistic part, or you can create new selves. You can actually forge a new part of yourself that's going to be very into something or other. Once you realize that, there isn't really just one you. Despite what you've been told your whole life, things become a lot easier for most people.
I love that. There isn't just one you. And, because I think about that, too, that I sort of feel like I have lived several different lives in my one life where I am right now. Like, I've been so many different people along the way, and I continue to evolve that way. So we're going to take a quick commercial break, but we are on with Jordan Gruber, and he is the co-author of the book, Your Symphony of Selves. You're listening to All About Healing. Don't go away, everyone. We'll be right back.
Now there's hope for authentic healing. A new book by Emily A. Francis, Whole Body Healing. Create your own path to physical, emotional, energetic, and spiritual wellness can help you discover a deeper way to approach your healing instead of using just the usual mainstream medical single methods. With Whole Body Healing and its extensive background of research, you'll be able to create your own healing path to achieve true and lasting results. Pre-order Whole Body Healing now at Amazon.com. You won't want to miss this priceless information. Whole Body Healing at Amazon.com by Emily A. Francis.
If you have low vision or are blind, then listen up. There's now high-visibility, trendy sports clothing available just for you. At AwareWolfGear.com, you'll find attractive, stretchy, warm hoodies, headgear, leggings, even kids wear to fit the duality of blindness, the need to be seen without drawing needless attention. Check out these trendy clothes for yourself or for someone you know at AwareWolfGear.com. That's AwareWolfGear.com. AwareWolfGear.com.
ASMC, the premier German company that supplies everything for adventure, from outdoor clothes to outdoor gear, even backpacks. Lots of quality and lots of specials. To start your adventure, go to HealthyLife.net's advertiser page and click on ASMC.
You may never totally understand this man-woman emotional connection thing, but now you can understand your muscles' emotional connection in regards to your health. That's right, your muscles have an emotional connection. And if you want an easy-to-use blueprint to understand your muscles' emotion, then get Emily A. Francis's book, The Body Heals Itself. It helps you activate and heal your muscles on an emotional level. So indeed, the body heals itself. Plus, it's filled with tools you can use immediately. Find out more at EmilyAFrancisBooks.com. Buy The Body Heals Itself now.
When you need a positive point of view, turn to HealthyLife.net, your 24/7 radio network for a better future.
Welcome back, everyone. You're listening to All About Healing. If you're just tuning in, I'm your host, Emily Francis, and I'm grateful that you're here. And I want to talk to Jordan Gruber about a lot of different things, but let's first get your website and where people can order the book.
Sure. You can get it from yoursymphonyofselves.com. or from JordanGruber.com, and of course it's on Amazon. If you go to the website, yoursymphonyofselves.com, that's SELVES, you can read a free excerpt as well.
Wonderful. Okay, so I want to jump right in. Let's talk about the history of how this came up.
It's an interesting thing because Jim wrote a reader's note, and he said, at the end of doing this book, which took us 5 years to put together, he came to the realization that we're really just trying to bring things back to where psychology was in the 1890s in America, when, among others, William James, the father of American psychology, called what we're talking about social selves. He said everyone has different social selves. As many different selves as you are in different situations where you are with people and you do different things. And we think he basically had it completely right. We then present a historical kind of story in one of the chapters of the book where we show what we call the flows of influence, who influenced who had this idea first, who was open to it, and then who closed down to it. And when you follow the flows of influence diagram, you see that a lot of the action was originally in Paris around a guy named Jean-Martin Charcot. People who studied with Charcot included William James and Sigmund Freud and Alfred Binet and the great Pierre Genet. So all these guys studied with Charcot, who was working with what they then called hysterical women, and there was no question to these people that there were different selves in some of these patients. Freud turns out to be the pivotal character here. Freud's first paper was on Anna O, written with Joseph Breuer, and in that paper he thanks Pierre Genet and his uncle and Albert and Binet for their work on this very subject. He explicitly thanks them for their work on selves. Later on, though, as part of what's called rejecting the seduction hypothesis, Freud got rid of selves completely and said that they were never real. Basically, there were a lot of people in high-class Vienna who were his clients, and there were reports of abuse, sexual abuse, and other sorts of things. And he said, everyone is making all that up. Here's my theory to explain it, and none of this happened. And pretty much by 1910, selves were dead. In 1905, at Harvard, Pierre Genet gave a whole conference where he was talking about selves. So we trace it all, and we see the influence of Carl Jung, who, as it turns out, wrote his medical dissertation on his cousin's case of multiple personality. And you see, after Freud, Jung sort of brought the concept internally with archetypes and autonomous complexes. And then there were others who picked up the ball, like Roberto Saggioli, who came up with psychosynthesis, and then we have others. But you can see that while this is a very well-discussed topic up to around 1910, it was completely turned off and subsumed by Freud, who said it was wrong. And then the next time you heard anybody talking anything about this, it was the three faces of Eve, and then Sybil, and then these sort of hyper-pathological situations, or the great book of the Minds of Billy Milligan, written by Daniel Keyes, who wrote Flowers for Algernon. So there were people beginning to talk about it, but the idea that all of us have selves and that the healthiest and most successful people are the ones who have figured out how to best orchestrate and harmonize and work with themselves, that idea hasn't been talked about for over 100 years. And we think that's a mistake, and we're kind of here to change that.
I love that so much, because I do think that there is so much history, so much education, so much research that has been hidden away, and then people just follow whatever the generation, I think about this a lot because I think, in your book you talk about different religions and different ways of viewing spirit and the body and the combination. And I think about this so often because I often wonder, the people that never ever go deep into looking for their own information and what do they really believe and based on what? Is it just because this is what you've been taught and then you never look the other way because this is it? So I love that you're uncovering so much information. So I want to go into what are the things that you want people to know that you've uncovered or that they need to know from you today?
Okay, sure. We can, we say we don't have a theory because we really don't, but we have a few basic premises. The first is that healthy, normal people have more than one self. All of us have selves. The second is that your different selves, they're truly different. They have inherent value. They have their own agendas. You can't just fuse them out of existence, as some misguided therapists tried to do in the 60s and 70s before they realized that just didn't work. And then the most important point is that ultimately it's easy to see beyond the single self-assumption and have your life work better. This isn't something you have to pay money for or learn anything else from. Whether you get it from the title or the first chapter or the in-depth chapters or the technical chapters, it's the same point that we're making over and over. It's in cartoons, it's in music, it's in culture. If what we're saying is true, you would expect to find it nearly everywhere, and you do once you start looking for it. And the great news is that once you realize that you and the people in your life have selves, it's a lot easier to be more compassionate and more forgiving and to just have your life work better. So what we're doing is we're inviting people to just try to suspend the single self-assumption for a day and see how they feel, see if life works better. And what we can tell you from a lot of reader feedback is that people are feeling that they're being given permission to be all of who they are in a way they haven't for a very long time. And it's just such a tremendous burden when people are relieved of this erroneous, pervasive assumption that you see everywhere. And you see it also in a lot of spiritual work, too. There's a lot of courses and stuff that in the very end they try to get you back to creating a single super self, your high self, your best self. And if you connect with that self and have it power you up, you'll always be okay. And we're saying, no, that's not how it works. You're always going to be in one of your ordinary selves. You might have a high self, but ask it what its favorite restaurant is, right? That's not where you as a human being live and interact with other people. So we're just inviting people to go, wow, there are these different parts of me, and they're real, and they have different needs and agendas. They even have different entelechies, with the entelechy of an acorn to become an oak. Yourselves are different parts of who you are, and when you acknowledge them, when you respect them, when you learn to work with them, and that includes the worst selves, as it were, that you have, selves that do things that you don't want. We like to say that there's a big difference between having a bad dog and being a bad dog. And even the bad dog that you might have, it wants to be a good dog if you find a way to work with it and give it kind of appropriate tasks or come to an agreement that, an hour of doing whatever you do that you probably shouldn't be doing is more than enough, and then you'll just stop. Things like that, simple ways of really negotiating within yourself, and that's why we give lots and lots of models and ideas and what different therapists have said for how to actually integrate and coordinate yourselves and get them to work better with each other.
Can you take this into children? How would you approach this with children that would be under the category of behavior, oppositional defiance, any of these I know we don't want to label per se. This seems to go right into children.
I'm sorry. One of the ways that people seem to get what we're talking about very quickly is when we point out that with children it's very obvious that there are some moments that are teachable moments and others that aren't. And that's also true with adults, of course. So I think that having the knowledge that the child you're working with, whether they have pervasive developmental, whatever their problem is, recognizing that this kid has different parts too, and it has a cooperative part of who they are. If you can get working with that part, I have a very close friend who works with kids on the autism spectrum, and I've watched her work with people by Zoom, and it's very clear that it's establishing a relationship and bringing out the part of that kid that is socially interactive and is willing to have a real conversation with a caring adult. That's where the healing for that person comes out because, my friend brings out that part of who they are. So I think that knowing that the people, the kids that you're working with have different parts of who they are and recognizing that there's a more patient part of who you are and you need to, bring that with you. And if it's not there, you need to, get it into the driver's seat.
I'm trying to kind of wrap my head around because I totally see all of this, but I do want to bring it into how you fasten that into the whole stuff. You're saying that's not how you have to do it, but there still is some part that all of it can be recognized and used as the whole within your whole one body, mind, spirit. Anyway, we've got to take a quick commercial break, and then I do want to bring it into that. We're on with Jordan Gruber, co-author of Your Symphony of Selves. You're listening to All About Healing, everyone. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
Now there's hope for authentic healing. A new book by Emily A. Francis, Whole Body Healing. Create your own path to physical, emotional, energetic, and spiritual wellness can help you discover a deeper way to approach your healing instead of using just the usual mainstream medical single methods. With Whole Body Healing and its extensive background of research, you'll be able to create your own healing path to achieve true and lasting results. Pre-order Whole Body Healing now at Amazon.com. You won't want to miss this priceless information. Whole Body Healing at Amazon.com by Emily A. Francis.
Audiobooks gives you instant access to over 50,000 of the best sellers and hottest book titles in romance, mystery, fiction, and many other genres. Just visit HealthyLife.net's advertiser page and click on Audiobooks to get started.
You may never totally understand this man-woman emotional connection thing, but now you can understand your muscles' emotional connection in regards to your health. That's right, your muscles have an emotional connection. And if you want an easy-to-use blueprint to understand your muscles' emotion, then get Emily A. Francis's book, The Body Heals Itself. It helps you activate and heal your muscles on an emotional level. So indeed, the body heals itself. Plus, it's filled with tools you can use immediately. Find out more at EmilyAFrancisBooks.com. Buy The Body Heals Itself now.
Okay, you're stressed. You need a little R&R. Wouldn't going to a spa help? There's all kinds of spas, too. Destination spas, medical spas, day spas, even dental and mobile spas. Where do you find the right spa at the right price? Oh, no, more stress? Well, not anymore. Visit spafinders.com. At spafinders.com, you'll find everything you need to know about spas from around the world. So de-stress. Click on spafinders.com right on our homepage. I'm feeling relaxed already.
The bright side of talk. HealthyLife.net.
Welcome back, everyone. You're listening to All About Healing. I'm your host, Emily Francis, and we have Jordan Gruber on the air today. He is the co-author of the book, Your Symphony of Selves. Coincidentally, he has another book out as well. What's it called?
It's called The Bounce, B-O-U-N-C-E. It's on rebound exercise.
Now, we pulled this in because, we have 2.5-minute break where we actually get to kind of dish. So I'm going to bring this up because what I asked you before the break was, once you start to really get to know your different selves, there is still a part that we want to pull it into, even though you said this is not how it works, the big massive person. But in my world, I want to acknowledge all the different selves, and then I want to know how to work with them within my one self.
Well, here's the important concept. If we put a capital S on your one self and say that you have some sort of written self, then I don't have any problem with that. In fact, I think I believe that. And in fact, in the book, we talk about moving to center, and we talk about developing a sense of presence. So I think what you could say is that we all have a constellation of selves, a pattern, and perhaps the one true self who we ultimately are is more represented by that pattern and how it evolves over time. But again, at the pragmatic level that we're talking about, we're just trying to get people to focus on their individual day-to-day selves that show up and that kind of come in and come out on a regular basis. So what we're saying is that, you don't have a regular self with a capital S that's showing up all the time. Or if you do, you're a very high and powerfully spiritually realized being who might not even be able to take care of himself or herself. That's not functional. What's functional is having ordinary selves that recognize you have other selves and so do other people, and then that process of healing, of integrating, of organizing kind of arises naturally.
Okay, I love that. And I'm about to bring it home with your other work because when you do start to integrate and acknowledge the different energies that run inside you and use them, like Sasha Fierce, instead of saying, "Oh my gosh, I have stage fright," you become so dynamic. The physical part, the rebounder, bouncing, balances both sides of the brain and helps children and adults alike be able to function and pull all those pieces into a physical. Take me there. Bring it back home.
I think what you're saying is true. I haven't ever really that explicitly yet tried to bring them together. I mean, for me, it's generally more like when I'm bouncing, I usually have a pretty disciplined self, but sometimes I have a very, imaginary self that's millions of miles away. But a lot of the times I'm focused. But I think rebound, I'm the choir, right? You're preaching to me. I love rebounding. I've been doing it every day for 18 years for around 45 minutes, and, I'm much healthier and stronger and more muscular than I otherwise ever would have been. And I just really love that. And I feel it does integrate me. It does bring me into my center, and it does, even 2 or 3 or 5 minutes of bouncing early in the morning, and all of a sudden I'm fully present. I'm not sure which part of me is going to be fully present, but I will be fully present.
See, that is, if you haven't really sat with this, it does perfectly align. And that comes from some of my work because I talk about that I believe that the body is physical, emotional, energetic, spiritual, and to not acknowledge those different levels. And if you're attempting to heal something, if you miss one of those avenues, you're not going to get as big of a result as you could get, which is why my child does have recovery from her autism spectrum diagnosis, and why we always have a trampoline in any house. So we've rebought trampolines. We're having one shipped. I always have to have one because I know the value, and I grew up with one, but I know the value is very different for my child than it is for me, who was a gymnast and loved my trampoline. I used to jump off the roof onto the trampoline. That's a whole different game than what I need for my child. But I also realize, and I'm using her, I have two children, but the one with recovery, she has a very unique way of thinking of things. And I've had to sort of say, maybe because she likes to do videos and pretend she has a YouTube channel. She doesn't yet, but she does all these videos and becomes a very different child in front of the camera. So I've had to say things like, because she's super painfully shy. So I'll say, maybe pretend like you're doing a video. Maybe pretend you're hosting this. And then it'll switch her into a different mind frame, which now you're saying the self.
Part is to go ahead and pretend, right, that you're moving to that part. I will say that one of our constructs in the Bounce book, which I wrote with Joy Daniels, is the idea of the Vitruvian sphere, going from Leonardo da Vinci's icon and thinking of the space around you while you're bouncing as a sphere, and your goal with your arms, or if you're using weights or body blades, to eventually fill in all of the possible ways you can kind of color in the energy surrounding you while you're doing it. And I do feel that there's something about the repetitive motion, because you're not going anywhere, so you sort of sink in deeper where you are in real time, and yet you're doing a lot of work with, cardio and immune and muscle tone. I mean, there's a ton of benefits. So, yeah, I do think it helps integrate me. Maybe that helped me write the book.
I think there's a lot to it, and I think this is. I did my master's thesis for my human performance degree on physical activity and the effects of ADHD and how it affects the brain and what we're looking at, what kind of movements and how we do it in the classroom. But I think there is such a untapped treasure that you're sitting on that when you pull the two books that you've done and you really go deep into it, you're going to find that you've always thought those were separate, but they're really exactly, you're doing an approach into what you already know of the selves.
Well, perhaps this is like Jim's vision of me giving a TED Talk on the Selves book while I'm bouncing on a rebounder. And then, of course, I could be on microdosing at the same time, right?
That would be perfection if you do that. Can you please invite me? Because how fun would that be? And I'll nominate you for a TED Talk because I think it would be just phenomenal. And I do think that all this stuff is so important. And I love this because my show is on healing. And there's no parameter to what is possible for your healing. So anybody that's listening to this, that's really the most important thing. Now, I told Jordan, and you guys that listen to my show regularly know, that on this segment, I give the author or the guest 2 or 3 minutes of their own platform, because everybody comes onto the show with a message that is just theirs. And I never want them to hang up and think, dang, I didn't get my chance to say what I really wanted to say. So I'm going to step back, and I'm going to give you the floor, Jordan, and you share anything that you think is really important that people know walking away from today.
Okay. Well, I think what's most important is that what we're saying is not really that hard an idea to grasp, and it's certainly not a new idea. But we feel that if you just start playing with it even a little bit, and this is inexpensive, and you can do it for as much or little as you want, just try, internal thought experiments. What if I really do have a part of me that as I'm approaching my partner and we're going to have a difficult discussion, what if I ahead of time shift into the part of me that is unflappable and kind and won't fall into the same argumentative patterns that I always do? What if that will really work? What if there's a part of me that loves exercising, getting out, even during the pandemic, and I just have to find a way to shift into that before the whole day is gone every day? Maybe I would be a lot happier if I could do that. So we're, pretty much saying that this is something that is out there and makes so much sense. It's so much parts of life, we like to say that an Alcoholics Anonymous, it's so successful is because when somebody comes in, they say, my name is Jordan Gruber, I'm an alcoholic. They bring into the room the part of them, the self, that is an alcoholic, as opposed to going to see a therapist where they might, for 3 or 4 sessions, claim they don't even have a problem. It's not the part that has the problem. So once you see where this shows up in life, it becomes more and more obvious that the single self assumption was wrong and was always wrong, and that you can do lots of things to cultivate and work with and harmonize yourselves. There's a concept in philosophy called Occam's razor, or parsimony, which says don't unnecessarily multiply explanatory entities. Now, a lot of people have said, hey, you're putting this whole other layer of selves and it makes no sense, and we're saying, maybe, but read the book, read the examples, apply it to your own life, and you will see that this makes so much sense out of so much that has been confusing for so long. It's certainly worth investigating and trying in your own life and seeing if what we're saying is right.
I love it. Jordan Gruber, I can't wait to have you back on the show, and let's talk later about making that happen. Thank you for being here. You guys, Emily's Energy Corner.